Hey everyone, Chell here with Prismatic Powders. Thanks for joining to talk about powder. So what are we talking about today? I'm so glad you asked, because we're talking about acrylic powders. But before we get too far, please like and subscribe if you find our channel helpful. And if you don't, you can like and subscribe anyway. Now, acrylic powders are widely used in the automotive industry because they offer great chemical resistance, excellent durability, UV resistance, and they have a very smooth finish. However, there are some potential issues that can occur because acrylic powders are not compatible with most common powder types. And if they commingle, you will get defects like craters in your finish. So here are some best practices that you should employ if you're considering using acrylic powders in your shop. In a perfect world, you would have a totally separate system for acrylic powders. But understandably, not everybody can afford that. So for those of you who just have one system, here's what you should be doing. Now, at a bare minimum, I would suggest using a separate hose for acrylic powders. And we have 2 lengths for sale on our website, so you can check those out. We'll link those in the description below. And if you happen to be in a bind and you don't have a spare hose, I'll include some tips on how to get the powder out of there until you get yourself a spare hose. Now, let's dive in, shall we?
If you must use the same system for acrylic and non-acrylic powders, start with a clean system and end with a clean system. What I mean is, before you spray acrylic powders, you really need to make sure that all the pathways for powder are thoroughly clean. We used filtered and compressed air for the initial cleaning, blowing off all the components of the system. For us, this is the gun, the fluidizer, the pump head, and the hoses. We will disassemble all the pathways the powder will travel within the gun, and we'll double check them and wipe them down afterward with a damp cloth. And just to note, we only use water to moisten the cloth. Make sure you clean the internal surfaces and external surfaces of the powder pathways. It's amazing where powder will collect. We strip the pump head for the fluidizer so we can get all the tight spaces that powder can hide. The fluidizer receives the same treatment of air and a wipe down. Now, probably the most overlooked and tricky to deal with is the hose that connects the gun to the fluidizer. Use filtered and compressed air to blow the hose out. I like to whip the hose between shots of air so the clumped up powder is broken up and more easily evacuated. When you no longer visibly see powder leaving the end of the hose, you can take a foam earplug and place it in one end, and then use the compressed air to push it through the hose. You need to repeat this until you can no longer see powder residue on the plug that you've got in the hose. Make sure you blow off any workbenches or anything that could collect powder when you're done. And before you start spraying acrylic powders, make sure to get any bags or boxes of powder out of the area so there is no possibility of cross-contamination.
All right, so here's a prime example of why when you're working with acrylics, you don't want any other powders in the vicinity, and vice versa when you've got acrylics in your process. So this is a hopper with acrylics in this fluidizer, so it's acrylics here. And then here on this side, we have an empty fluidizer But if I weren't paying close attention, I'd maybe take this lid off and look inside and it's empty. And if I weren't sure that it was clean, I would be a little more diligent, and I'm a skeptical person, so I look and look at that. Now, I don't know what that is necessarily, but it could have been residue from this acrylic clear, and if I would have sprayed, then that much acrylic clear in the process is going to ruin that whole job. You're going to get the fish eyes and all the defects in your coating. So it's really, really, really important that you isolate your acrylics. I would say don't even store them next to your other powders unless you've got maybe a double bag inside of a box, but just have something separate for them. So when you're finished spraying acrylic powders, you're going to follow the same procedures for cleanup. All of that stuff needs to be just as clean as when you began. And the truth is, you should already be employing most of these practices anyways, but I know how it goes, so I encourage you to be very diligent about cleanliness, and you'll be just fine. As I mentioned before, we do have hoses for sale on our website, so you can have your very own special hose for acrylics. And hopefully this video helps clarify things regarding acrylic powders. It does require some careful attention, but it's not the big scary monster, and acrylic powders do have some great qualities and purposes. So that's going to do it. Thanks for watching. We appreciate it.